welcome to our Friday live stream. We're back in the saddle, making sure that we're making this a little more regular thing. I know we missed a few weeks, and last week was our first week back after a couple of week break. And I'm sorry to say that I'll probably not do next week. I'll try my best, but there'll be like a huge time change difference. I'll be out of town again, but I'll see what I can do about getting in the live stream. It may just not be at our regular time, so I'll do my best. But we got a great live stream plan today, which is kind of something that a lot of people have been asking for, which is a more open-ended and less structured version. Normally we're sort of talking about the video that had been released from the previous or that week or earlier, a couple days before we did the live stream. And because we did a product video this week, which is a Paul Jackson Jr. boost demo, I wanted to make this kind of a more open-ended, make sure that I get to all the questions, which I normally do not. And so if you have a question or something's going on with your rig or anything that you think that I might be able to get you a little closer to what it is that you're going for, either sonically or gear-wise or troubleshooting-wise, this is the time to do it. So make sure you get your questions in, and I don't see any reason why we shouldn't be able to answer everything. We also have a bunch of giveaway items courtesy of our friends at Diodario and over at True Tone. So just to kind of walk you through some of the items we're going to be giving away today during the live stream, we have assorted Diodario picks, and we'll give you 2 packs of these for each winner. You get 2 packs. I think it's maybe 20-ish picks per, so that should last you a good long while if you win these. We also have the Diodario Pro Plus capos. We're going to be giving away some of those. We also have our True Tone milliamp readers and cable testers. This stuff I use all the time. I use the milliamp reader and the cable tester. It's just a great tool to have at the ready on standby. We already talked about the picks, and then the last thing we'll be giving away is a one-spot power supply, just a single wall wart from True Tone as well. And those will all be shipped directly to you. So if you're one of the winners, you'll get these shipped to you for free. No questions asked. Doesn't matter where you're located. We're going to make those available. And those will all be one predicated on you answering a question that we will put onto the screen every 8 minutes. So with that in mind, I'm going to start our 8-minute counter. I'm also going to set myself a timer on my phone because sometimes I just blow right through it and I forget that we have a giveaway. So I'm going to put that timer on. I've double timed it with my phone. So every 8 minutes we will give away one of these items, and there'll be 5 total items to give away throughout the course of the stream. So just so you know what the format is, if you're new and you haven't been to the stream before or you haven't checked it in a while. So let's just get right into it. We got our one of our regulars, Total Evo 7, tuning from Studio City. And now that you've have a collaborative project with RJM for a short run, will you be doing something similar with Goodwood Audio and its interfaces? No, I don't have anything planned with Goodwood Audio. I think that the interfaces that we will be doing will be their own thing, and we don't have any need to collaborate. The main reason why I collaborated with RGM is there's a lot of things that go into making a switcher that are really pretty complicated, and to figure all that stuff out on your own and not in kind of starting fresh, there's just a lot of things that you need to know. And I would be the first to admit that Ron is a much more skilled engineer than I am, in especially when it comes to switchers. Whereas with buffers and stuff like that, it's really all in the standard sort of analog domain, and so I'm very comfortable there in being able to do everything that we need to get the buffer interfaces done properly. Where I'm not as comfortable is in doing the things that are required to make a really high quality switcher, and there's just a huge learning curve. And so if I were going to make a switcher, I'd invariably have to contract out the pieces that I couldn't do. And so Ron and Sherry being willing to do this collaboration, if people don't know what he's talking about, we did a collaboration with RJM where we released a couple of switchers that were in the Rig Doctor spec, so to speak. And they're wonderful switchers as they are, undoubtedly. And one of the things that we talked about when we talk about switchers, and we've done this in our other videos, is that RGM is great. The only drawback I would say is that I think that the input impedance is a little bit off comparatively to what we're used to hearing when we plug into any one of our tube amps, which is typically 1 meg, and they're about half that at 500K. And so I talked to Sherry and Ron about doing a modified version that does an up, kind of ups the input impedance to 1 meg and keeps the output impedance nice and low, around 100 ohms. And they were willing to do that and do a special run of 10 units. Now, we sold through those 10 units immediately, like in a couple of hours once we released the content and said that they were available. And then they said they could fit in a few extra, and we ended up selling out of all those as well. So we sold out, in under a day. And so that was pretty cool. So it was encouraging, and maybe there'll be other stuff to come. But to answer your question, we took the scenic route to get there. Is that no, I don't have any plans to do that. I actually got our first enclosure just to test out for the production version, and there'll be, let's see, is it in this one? Yeah, it's in this one. So we'll have like 2 versions. So there'll be one that'll be built into the riser of the standard like Vertex risers. Let's see if I can show you a good picture in there. So you can kind of see it's built into the wall of the riser, and it's got 5 throughs. And then there's also going to be a standalone version for people that don't use risers or don't use one of our pedal boards. So it could just be an ordinary pedal enclosure, and people will be able to use that. It has the same features. It's the same PCB. Basically what we're doing is we have two boards that are connected with ribbon cables, and so you can connect them vertically like it is in that enclosure that fits into the wall or the leg of the wall of the riser, or you can use a different enclosure that's the same size but just drilled out to be a horizontal instead of a vertical. And it's the same board, has the same features. So that's something that we're working on, and that should probably be out in about, I'd say, excuse me, probably 2 months. Like the designs are done, the enclosures I approved. We still have to kind of figure out the artwork and how we're going to do it, because there's so many different ways to adjust the buffering and all that stuff. There'll be 4 buffers in there that are available to use, and so we just need to figure out like how to label them properly, what people will understand, how to connect it so they can have all their options. But it'll do everything. It'll do 4-cable method, wet dry wet, wet dry. It'll have an insert so that you could have an audition loop. You can do stereo, mono, so pretty much can do every contingency you can think of. It'll have an isolated output. So pretty cool stuff. Let's go to another one. That was a really long one. Sorry, guys. I like to replace my 3-foot HOSA insert cable with some custom length using square plugs and Mogami cable. What Mogami cable would you recommend? All right. So for the insert cables, you could actually just use the 2314. And then you'll just have 2 of them on the TRS side, and I think that the number for square plugs is SP550-S. There's only one, so you shouldn't have too many options there, and so you'll obviously tie the shields together on the 2 2314s, and that'll be the sleeve, and then you can designate one side to the tip and one to the ring, and then the opposite side you'll just solder them like ordinary guitar cables, and you just have to keep track of which one's the tip and which one's the ring, and so you know which is which, and you'll be fine. And on the pedal side, you could use SP400s or you could use SP S4s, depending on whether we want it straight or right angle. This is one from RDog2U. What causes intermittent grounding buzz? Well, it could be so many things. Sometimes it can be that there's a connection that's maybe the solder joint has become unseated or is not making full contact, and so when you move the pedal, it will it'll remove any of the qualities of the grounding. But there could be a million different things. Sometimes it can also just be like dirty contacts. Sometimes it can be a cable that's actually the problem and not the pedal at all. So there could really be a million different things. So what I would say is we did a cool video maybe a year ago with Rhett Shull, and we were like troubleshooting his rig. I guess it was over a year ago, because a year ago we'd still be in the pandemic, and this is definitely before that. And I would troubleshoot it working from the very end and then working backwards. And I've said this a lot of times. When if you were, say, your last 3 pedals on your pedal board were reverb, delay, and chorus, you would start at the very end. So your guitar would go into the reverb, the last pedal, the reverb would go into the amp, and you would test that, see what you hear. Then if it's fine, then you're going to add in the next pedal, which is delay. So you're going to go guitar into delay, delay into reverb, reverb into amp. Is your problem there yet? No. Okay, we're going to add in the next pedal. That was our clock for the giveaway. Let me just finish this, and then we'll go to our giveaway. So then I would go to the next pedal. So I'd go chorus, guitar into chorus, chorus into delay, delay into reverb, reverb into amp. Is the problem still there? And I would just keep doing that sequentially, going backwards from the end to see where the problem is, and if you can induce the intermittent issue. And if you're hearing that the grounding buzz is related to one specific device, or if it's a combination of devices, this will help you sort of isolate that. Now, I know sometimes it's hard when it's intermittent because you can't always create it. Sometimes that can be a little bit harder one to try to isolate. So I would say start there, see how it goes, and then you can always follow back up with us. But it is time for our very first giveaway question. So the way that this works is I'm going to put a question up on the screen. First person to answer this question correctly in the chat will win this item. So the first thing we're going to give away is a 2-pack of assorted D'Addario picks. So first person to answer this question will win a free 2-pack, and I think it's like, and it's not the wrapper. It's a 2-pack of picks. So I think it's just assorted sizes. So I think you'll get kind of a potpourri, so to speak, of picks. So here's the question. First person to answer correctly on the chat will win these items shipped to you free, no questions asked. The question is, in what scenario would it be beneficial to run your time-based effects into your effects loop? So in what scenario would it be beneficial to run your time-based effects into your effects loop? And I think another way to say this is, where would the gain be coming from in order to make this beneficial? Because you can have your distortion being generated by different things, depending on what your rig is. So that is the question. First person to answer that correctly is going to win. When would it be beneficial to run your time-based effects in your effects loop? And our winner here is Kingsley. Kingsley won this one, and he put this answer, which is the correct answer. Let me put him up on the screen here. So Kingsley said using an overdriven amp, and that is the truth. When you have an overdriven amp, an amp that is distorted, that's the time that you want to really utilize the effects loop, because if all of your distortion is coming from the clean, or from the pedals into a clean amp, there's no reason to do that. There's no reason to use the effects loop because the amp is totally clean. The only time that you'd want to put your delays and reverbs in the effects loop is when you're creating the distortion with your amp, because if you put delay in front, it would almost be like the same as on a clean amp setup if you were putting your delay and reverb, say, in front of a distortion pedal. You wouldn't ordinarily do that. You wouldn't usually go like, digital delay, tube screamer, rat, and then go into the front of the amp. And so that's kind of like essentially what happens if you have a really high gain amp, you're running delay into the front of it. It would be like, if you had a clean amp, you put delays in front of the pedals, which would be unusual. So congrats to Kingsley, but if you didn't win, we're going to start another giveaway in 8 minutes. So don't sweat. We'll have another one. Kingsley, congrats. You won some cool picks. And we got a super chat from Devin. Got my hands on one of the modded RGMs. Can't wait. Oh, I'm so happy, Devin. I'm glad that you got one because yeah, there was originally 10. We upped it to 15. Every one of them is gone, and I think we sold the first 10 in like 3 hours, and then when the next day we said we had a few extra. I think those were gone in, I don't know, another 3 hours or so. So yeah, very encouraging. That I think it definitely gives some credence to the fact that people do want to have high quality switchers, and I think RJM is certainly one of the best ones out there. And I think that with this buffer change, I think it checks all the boxes for me, and that's what I have on my little rig here. I'll show it again, but this is my mini wet dry wet board. I'll show you under the hood. So this one we're going to be doing a demo of soon, but I have one of the RJM modded PVC 6Xs on here. And that thing is a monster. It sounds so good and it's so functional. It's just like packs a punch. That whole rig is 17 inches by 10 inches, and it's got, let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's got 7 pedals. It's got a bank up, bank down addition foot switch on it, so I can have some extra control that beyond the foot switches on the RJM. And it's running full wet, dry, wet with a cab Zeus in stereo for the wet side. So pretty cool stuff. And thank you, Devin, for the super chat. But let's get to some more questions here. All right. All right, this is from Stevie Starr. Rig Doctor, can I use a 1 meg buffers for input and output? Accidentally got 2 of the same one on Creation Audio Lab. What should I do? Well, that's what you should do. Almost every high quality buffer will have a 1 meg input impedance. So the input impedance is not, you don't need to adjust it for the output buffer. The 1 meg input should work on all of them, and on all the rigs that we build, that we use, or that we've shown where we use that PCB kit that's built in from Creation Audio Lab. It's using the same buffer in all the places. It's not changing the buffer based on it being on the input or the output. It's the same circuit in every location. So you did what you should. You got 2 of them. If you have a mono system, you need 2 buffers. That's what you should have got. So you got the right stuff. And really, the input impedance is really only critical on the input. On the output buffer, it could be lower because the output impedance is more critical on the output buffer. But there's no consequence to having the same input impedance across the board on all of them. So really where the input impedance is most critical is on the input, because that's loading the guitar pickups, and you want them to think that they're seeing the front of a tube amp, which is ordinarily a 1 meg input impedance. So that's really why I state that should be the ideal loading for the input. But on the output, obviously you're playing this impedance leapfrog game all over the pedal board, because every pedal is a different input and output impedance. Really, the main thing you want to make sure when you get to the end of the board is that it's as low as possible. Around 100 ohms is ideal. So you're fine, Stevie Starr. You got what you need, and just follow the diagrams, and you'll be good. Let's see. Hello. Why does my tone change? Could it be soldering? Perhaps not done right. I'm using Mogami cables. Well, there could be a lot of things that contribute to things not sounding exactly the same. I think one of them could be the pedals. Ideally, you want to have as many true bypass pedals as possible with a high quality buffer first and a high quality buffer last. So sometimes when you have a lot of different impedances and you have a lot of different buffers that are going on your pedal board, and again, a Boss pedal, for example, is not just one buffer. Often Boss pedals have multiple buffers within them. And so, at least 2 buffers on almost every one that I'm aware of. They have an input buffer and they have an output buffer inside of the box itself. So it has a JFET input stage, and then it's got a BJT output stage. So you at least have 2 in every Boss pedal, and then other pedals might have, multiples in them as well. So there could be a consequence to that. That's why I say as much true bypass as you can. High quality input buffer, high quality output buffer is the best way. So that could be one reason. The other reason that you could be having a tone change is that you either don't have high quality buffering going on to supplement all your true bypass pedals and the poor quality buffers and maybe some of the other devices, or it could be that there is a problem with your cables. And a lot of people with Mogami, the kiss of death that 99.9% of problems with the Mogami cables that people run into is they forget to remove the conductive plastic around the center conductor, and they leave that on there, and that puts a load on the cables. Often it won't even work, but even if it does work, it's like a 5K load on the cable, and it sounds terrible. It sounds like there's a blanket on there, and sometimes people don't realize it because they might have a buffer, or they might have a pedal that has a buffer that's good enough to drive it, but then when they turn on a different device and the output impedance changes that's driving that bad cable, it then sounds terrible again. So I would say I would check to make sure that there's no conductive plastic. And this, if it looks black on your center lead, that means you did not remove the plastic. So that would be a big problem. And if you watch our video carefully where we give a tutorial about making Mogami cable, especially with 2319, that's something that you absolutely have to do. Otherwise, you undid any of the benefits of using that cable. So that is a prerequisite to using Mogami cable. You absolutely have to remove the conductive plastic. Now, 2314 does not have the conductive plastic, so you don't have any concerns if you use 2314. But if you use 2319 or 2524, those both have it. So that's what I would say. Jerry, you grabbed a PBC 6X. Oh my goodness, thank you. But there is a movable buffer, yeah. So all of them are all standardized to the spec. So every buffer in there is going to be the same spec, and really it's not that complicated to do it. There was just like a slight upcharge that RJM charged us, and that we just passed on to. That's why it's like, I think it's $20 more than a normal RJM, because they were charging us $20 more to do those changes in a group of, well, what was originally 10 but became 15. So yeah, they're all standardized to that, and with Ron's permission, I will actually even release a video that shows you how to do this modification. It's not that complicated. It's just a reminder that we got our giveaway coming right around the corner. So I'll okay. So when I finish this question, we'll do our second giveaway. But yeah, so everything is standardized to that across the board. You do have a movable buffer, so you do have your input and output buffers satisfied if everything's within the switcher. If you're using stuff outside the switcher, then you're going to have to use different output buffers, obviously, because it's not going to help you if you have stuff on that's after the switcher. But if everything's contained within the switcher, then you'll be just fine with the buffering that's inside of the RGM. And if you make any sort of interface, it could just be totally passive, just straight throughs. To be able to have easy access and organization to the rig. And I have diagrams for that, or you could just use our drilling templates for whatever size box you want to use as your interface, and just make the wires just straight pass-throughs 1-to-1 on each side. Yeah, I just recommend putting the input buffer is going to be there all the time, so that's first, and then I would put the output buffer as the last thing. Because I think it's on the return of the insert loop, as I recall, on the PVC 6X. So I would just put that one last, and you'll be good with all your buffering. But let's go to, and thank you, Jerry, for the support in getting that PVC 6X. We really appreciate that. Let's go to our second question. So again, if you're new, the way this is going to work is I'm going to put the question up on the screen. First person to answer this question correctly is going to win my favorite capo, the Diodario Pro Plus capo. Excellent capo. It's what I use here at home. That's what I use at the showroom when we're in LA, where Mahia is right now, who's managing the chat here. So let's do it. First person to answer correctly wins that Diodario Pro Plus capo. So the question is, name 2 common causes of tone suck. We already talked about some. What are 2 common causes of tone suck? I want to hear from you. 2 common causes of tone suck. First person to give us 2 satisfactory answers will win the D'Addario Pro Plus capo. D'Addario Pro Plus capo. Who's got it? All right, let's see. Jerry nailed this one. Too many buffers or not enough buffers. Both can be the kiss of death. If you have too many buffers, like I said, you got 5 boss pedals. That could be as many as 10 buffers, maybe even more. But if you don't have enough either, that can hurt you too. So it's one of those. It's that razor's edge that you walk with the buffers. Congratulations to Jerry. But if you didn't win, no problem, because we're going to restart the clock in 8 minutes. We're going to have another giveaway, so you'll be just fine. You'll be just fine. You'll be able to get yourself a different item. We got 3 more items to go. Let's go and take some more questions. All right, this is from Moises Cruz. Shout out to Moises in the Philippines. What are the pros and cons of a coiled instrument cable? Does it have a difference of sound in a normal cable or from a normal cable? So usually, yes. So it's, if you have a 20-foot coil cable, it's usually about twice the length that it actually is. So a 20-foot coil cable would be like a 40-foot ordinary cable. Now, there's some companies that make coil cables because people like the aesthetic, or they like kind of the slinky sort of feel of it, like Bestronix. They make a really low capacitance one, so even if you're going to a 20-foot cable, the consequence sonically is not so bad as like a 40-foot cable would be, because their instrument cables are like below 20 picofarad per foot. But in ordinary circumstances, it would be like doubling the length of your cable. And so there would be the extra capacitance that it would be associated with having double the length of cable. Now, some people famously have used them and have sounded great. You know, certainly Jimi Hendrix is a great testimony to the fact that coil cables doesn't mean that your tone is bad. There's been innumerable guitar players that have all wanted to emulate the sound of Jimi Hendrix, and he used a coil cable for his entire career, although short, I guess, comparatively to artists now, but nevertheless, he's kind of on the Mount Rushmore of, you know, guitar players with great tone, and he used nothing but a coil cable. So I don't know that it's the end of the world. I think it depends on how much fidelity do you want to the sound plugged directly into your amp. And if you like a little roll-off, maybe it's just fine for you. So I think that it's really a question more of personal taste rather than it's a good choice or a bad choice. But to answer your question, in most cases, yes, it will add more capacitance. There'll be a little bit more roll-off. And this would, if it's from your guitar, unless you have active pickups, you're going to get all that roll-off before you get into any signal conditioning on the board with a buffer or any pedal that has a buffer. So you will get a little loss from that. So that's my best answer, Moises. Let's see. Dan Morrison, you're back. Joe Perry on baritone guitar. All right. What's your favorite Mel Gibson film? Oh, this is from Danny. Favorite Mel Gibson? Lethal Weapon, of course. Yeah, you got to go Lethal Weapon with Mel Gibson, the very first one, which is always so funny to see, like somebody with a Winnebago in Malibu. This is something that would never exist. The residents of Malibu are so picky; they would never allow anybody to overnight park on the beach. It's not, let alone live there, which is funny that you always see Mel Gibson, like in the first Lethal Weapon, he's like, you know, drunk and like laying on the floor of his Winnebago that's parked, you know, in front of the beach on Highway 1 in California. It's just like a total impossibility that you'd be able to set up shop there, in Malibu in particular. But you also got Eric Clapton and David Sanborn doing all the music for Lethal Weapon. You can't go wrong there. And if you want to learn how to play the Lethal Weapon Eric Clapton guitar parts, Danny at Marvin can show you. He can show you that. And I'm expecting, Danny, a lesson on that you're going to publish to YouTube so that we can all share in the fruit of your labor. So please, Danny, do that. Hey, Art from Qatar. Wow, coming a long way. 1 a.m. in the Philippines. Oh, boy. Well, thank you. All right, this is from David. I'm not sure if this is your thing, but what would you do to tame the high frequency of a Jazzmaster? It's a bit too bright for my normal setup with my other guitars. What would I do with a bright Jazzmaster? Well, a lot of times those originally I think had flat wounds on them, and I've heard people say that they sound more like they should when you have flat wounds, and it also resolves a lot of the bridge issues that they can have. That may be one thing to try. If you're trying to do it without having to do anything to the guitar itself, I would say you could do an EQ up front to help kind of like tame some of the top end as it's coming into the system. But that might also have some consequences downstream by doing that. So I would say that if you're finding it to be unpleasant and you don't feel like you can just go and change the settings of your guitars, or you have to do quick guitar changes and you're not able to change the settings of the amplifier, I think that the least invasive way would certainly be doing the EQ up front as like one of the first thing that's coming into the rig. So then that way it's kind of shaping the guitar tone before it enters the pedal board, so you don't have to change any other settings, and then you could bypass the EQ when you're not using your Jazzmaster. I think that would be the least invasive way to do it. Art said he switched to the one spot, and I'm thinking you're talking about the True Tone, the full blown power supply. I think that you can get away with these guys for small things like this individual one spot, but really their power supply is the flagship product and is really a pretty good power supply. That the biggest one is sort of like a half switch mode, because it does have the AC side is still linear, but the rest of them are all switch mode. And then of course the smaller ones like the CS6 and the CS7, those are all full switch mode, but they are great. They're small. They're very affordable for what they offer, and I think that they're nice power supplies for sure. So I'm glad that helped, Art. Let's see. What is your favorite music documentary? Gosh. I mean, I guess it's not really a documentary. It's more of a mockumentary. I think it's got to be Spinal Tap. I think that's one of my favorites. But I guess I don't know, like I watched a good one recently that was all about, like LA in the 60s and 70s. And it was all about the kind of like the Topanga Canyon, crowd of, Joni Mitchell and the Byrds and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young and kind of that whole scene. And that was pretty cool to kind of, see those interviews and kind of how all these people, a lot of them not even from California, a lot of Canadians coming in. I mean, you got Joni Mitchell and Neil Young right there already. You got two Canadians. Yeah, that was pretty cool. But I wouldn't say that I've watched a ton of music documentaries. So that's the best I can do. But this is just reminding me that we're about a minute away from our giveaway, so I'll take another question, and then we'll go on to our next giveaway question. Any recommendations on tone loss from a wireless system? Yeah, this is tough because that obviously is what's starting out your entire tone. So on some of the newer wireless systems, they have some compensations that you can adjust on them so that you can kind of make it sound more like an ordinary guitar cable. And, buffering obviously after it doesn't really help because it's already low impedance. So it's not really a problem there. I mean, this may be sort of a similar thing that I said to the person that was asking about how to EQ their Jazzmaster. so it doesn't have as much high end. Like, you may consider putting some sort of EQ up front if you feel like it's a sort of a specific frequency. If you just feel like it's like a liveliness, you could try doing something like, a sonic maximizer up front. You could try doing something like having some sort of boost with an EQ up front that maybe adds in some more mid-range or something like that. Those could all be options that you could explore to try to get it to be a little bit more lively. One that I really like, if it's kind of more that mid-range thing, the Demeter mid boost is really pretty hip, I think, at doing that, and that was what was in all those Tyler guitars back in the 80s. I guess it's just still a version of that mid boost in them now, but that one can be really nice. And one of the guys that's on our membership page, Alexander, he got the one that Michael Thompson has, which is by Kaufman, and it's a similar sort of effect. And he sent me some clips of it, kind of on and off, and it sounds really nice. It kind of just bringing in some of like that top end that's beautiful but doesn't sound too sharp or too shrill, because sometimes, when you bring in top end, it can be a really fine balancing act to make sure that it doesn't sound displeasing or fatiguing. And I think the Kaufman kind of has that perfect sort of like chime to it. And if you've listened to any of Michael Thompson's sessions, like whether we're talking about Celine Dion or any of that David Foster stuff, there's just this ring to the sound with the Strat that's just like unbelievably good. And that Kaufman is part of that sound. So I would say you could try either of those without knowing the problem exactly that the wireless is sort of inducing. I can't tell you a real specific answer, but I hope that helps. So it is time for another giveaway. So again, the way this will work is I'll put a question up on the screen. First person to answer this correctly in the chat will win this item. So what we're giving away is going to be a milliamp reader from True Tone. Great piece of equipment that you can use to see how much current your pedals are drawing. If you're starting to put together a pedal board, you want to make sure you're not exceeding any of your power outputs. It also has a cable tester in there, which is a good fast reference tool. So let's do it. Question is, name 3 devices that contain high quality buffers, 1 meg input impedance and approximately 100 ohm output impedance. We'll accept stuff that's kind of within, let's say 100 to 200 ohms on the output. So these could be standalone buffers, or these could be pedals that already have high quality buffers in them. So I want you to name 3 devices. A lot of buffers we talk about all the time could be in this list. There are also other devices that would meet this criteria. So go ahead and put that in the chat. First person to get all 3 wins. Let's see what we got here. I think the first one that I got here is Ezra Elliott, because he's got Strymon pedals, which meet that criteria. They have 1 meg input impedance, 100 ohm output impedance. The Bonafide buffer from TC Electronic has that spec, 1 meg input, 100 ohm output, and the Polytune. I'm going to give him the credit that it's the one that has the onboard buffer, which is the same that's in the Bonafide. So this one goes to Ezra. Ezra, congrats! You're going to get this one. And if you didn't win, no problem, because we have another giveaway in 8 minutes. So I'm going to restart the clock, and we're going to continue going through these questions. All right. All right, this is from Mackenzie. I'm thinking about grabbing a Chase Bliss MK2 preamp, but I'm wondering, how would I get the germanium fuzz to work with a buffer? Is the solution just to put the preamp before the buffer? Well, I got one here, and I would say, yeah, like if you're going to use the buffer setting on it, or if you're going to use, the fuzz setting on it, you would want to bypass the buffer in your switch. If it's a switcher, it's really easy because you can just bypass the input buffer for those presets. And the RGM one has, I think, loop 1 through 3. You can turn off the buffer on the input if you put it into, I think it's called like the fuzz mode or something like that for that preset. So that makes it handy if you're going to utilize the fuzz in that unit. If you don't have a switcher, what you could do is you could put the input buffer on like a true bypass loop that you could turn off when you're going to go for your fuzz, and you could put that switch somewhere down by the fuzz so it's not too much of a leap for you to get there. That would be another way to do it. I know it's not necessarily like the coolest way to do it, but it is one option that will prevent you from having to go too far. The other thing is you could disaggregate your input and output buffers into like individual units, like I say, like a true tone pure buffer, right? And that just has an input and an output. You could put that on, you could put a foot switch, right next to your fuzz as the thing that your guitar plugs into. And then like a true bypass loop would go around that true tone buffer, and then the next thing would be the fuzz. So when you don't have your fuzz on, then you hit the buffer on. But when you want to turn your fuzz on, you turn the buffer off, you turn the fuzz on. That would kind of get you in the same zone, and then you would have that second buffer at the very end of the chain as your output buffer. So that'd be one way that you could do it that would sort of help mitigate issues when you're using the fuzz tone into the in the Chase Bliss preamp. So that could be one way to get around it. Because yeah, it definitely does sound different. It affects the sound negatively if you're using the fuzz sound from that with an input buffer. Okay, I'm migrating a board to be stereo, which means I need a different output buffer situation. Why aren't there any stereo output buffers on the market? Am I best just buying 2 Mesa clear links? Yes, there aren't a lot, and I think that the one that I had been recommending was discontinued, the Empress stereo buffer, and I think a lot of the reason why is that they're not. It wasn't because it wasn't a good quality unit. It was, I think, because they just didn't have the right clientele that they had carved out that knew the benefits of such a product. And I think we're a little bit different in that 90% of the stuff that goes on our YouTube channel has some mention of high quality buffers. And so we've really hammered that hard into our audience to understand that it's really important that they follow these guidelines when it comes to high quality buffers. So with that said, I think that they just didn't have the right clientele base to make a product like that work, and therefore, the idea of it just didn't have any staying power, unfortunately. But I don't think it was a bad product, and if you can find one, I think that it'll be fine. So to answer your question, you probably, if you have a Mesa Boogie buffer now, like a high wire or some sort of dual buffer, keep it, because that will satisfy everything going into the first amp. You would just need to get a second buffer, output buffer, to go to the right amplifier, the stereo amplifier. And ideally, you're going to need also some sort of isolation for it. So you could either buy an output buffer that already has an isolation transformer in it. The Sur one is one that has it. I don't really love the isolation transformer in it. It's kind of like a cheap, like 10K to 10K, like a triad buffer, or sorry, triad transformer. He's not the only guy that uses it. Robert Bradshaw is using them, but I don't find them to be that good with a lot of output hitting them, and they tend to distort. And even if you try to stabilize them, and I don't even think on those you can do. I don't think you can really do a Zobel or or you can't really servo those either. That they just not that great for this purpose. And so, but I think for most people, they probably won't know the difference. They're probably not testing it in that capacity, so it might just be fine. I mean, certainly there's been tons of players that have used that transformer without ever knowing it, and probably have never thought any different of it. So I would say it's a long way to say that probably something like the Sur buffer would be better for that second output because it has the isolation. And if you need it, you're going to certainly want to have that galvanic isolation on one output, and it's got a polarity switch so you can invert the polarity so that you can make sure that you're not getting any sort of weirdness or what you might perceive as like a phase issue. So I would do that. I would go with the Sur buffer as the second output buffer, and then you could really get anything. If you don't already have a dual buffer, you basically would just get 2 other ordinary, high quality buffers like the ones that we recommend, and then you just get one of the isolated output buffers for the right amplifier. So that's what I would do. And I don't think the ClearLink has any transformers in it. So you could if you wanted to go Mesa Boogie, you would just get one ClearLink, and then you have to get one with an isolation output. Or if you wanted to use two ClearLinks, then you'd have to get like a Lely P-split or something that would be an isolated, would have an isolation transformer, and that could just live on top of your amp or something like that. I wouldn't put it on the pedal board. I think it'll work better the closer it is to the input of the amplifier. All right, let's see. Okay, so I've been trying to figure out the best way to use noise suppression for my signal. I have a DS2 in front of the amp and an MXR in the effects loop. Okay. Well, I don't think that you'd need to have two. I think one should probably do it. So the main question, and we have a video that's coming out that Mejia and I have been working on with our video editor Victor this whole week, which has taken a while to get right. But the main thing that you need to consider is, what are you trying to gate? Are you trying to gate out 60 cycle hum from the guitar noise that you're trying to gate out? Are you trying to gate out noise that's being induced from guitar pedals, like noisy guitar pedals? Or are you running a high gain amp and the gain is being generated from the preamp? I'm looking at an Eddie Van Halen 5150 PV here, which is a noisy one. So I think it depends on what you're trying to gate out. So if you're trying to gate out noise from the amp, then you would want to use the noise gate. Let's say it's like an ordinary, like a decimator or an NS2. I mean, you said you have I think you maybe meant NS2 instead of DS2. I think NS2 is the noise suppressor. That one has input, output, and send and return. So what I would do is I would put the guitar. This is just my reminder for our giveaway. I'll do that after we get through this question. So for the noise gate for the NS2, guitar would go into the input of it. Send would go into the input of the amp from this noise gate, and then the send from the amplifier effects loop, which is the preamp out, would go to the return of the noise gate, the NS2. And then the output of the NS2 would go to any of the processing effects that are going to go in the effects loop, and then the last processing effect would go to the return of the effects loop. So that's basically putting the noise gate around the preamp of the amplifier. Now, if you want to include distortion pedals in there, that you're trying to gate out as well, if you have some distortion pedals that are creating noise, the guitar would go into the NS2, the send would feed any of those distortion pedals, and then those distortion pedals would lead into the input of the amplifier, the preamp in. The send, which is the preamp out of the effects loop, would then go to the return. So you would basically be looping in the pedals along with the preamp, and then those would all be isolated. And so the input of the noise gate would come, presumably the guitar would plug into that, or if you had some other effects that were preamp effects that you didn't want to have in the noise gate, you could put those before you go into the input of the noise gate. But you're basically looping in all the stuff that's creating the noise into the loop of the gate. Now, on the MXR one, I think does that one have a key input? I forget if the smart gate has a key input, or if it's just a send, or if it's just an input and an output. In that case, most people typically use it right after the send. So it's like send in a noise gate, and then it goes into the subsequent effects. If it has a key input, like a Zool or something like that, you'd want to split off from the input on the guitar with some sort of splitter of some kind. And if you have a high quality buffer, you could actually just make a Y cable straight off of the output, because it's basically the same thing that a splitter is doing. And if it's low in impedance, it shouldn't be an issue. And then you can feed the key input from there, and then the other side will feed the first pedal in your signal path. And then that way, it's a little bit better at sensing the attack, so it kind of knows when to gate and when not to gate. So that's what I say. Okay, next one. When can we expect the Vertex buffer interface? I would say about 2 months. We're done with the design, and really this design's been done. We've been using this design for a long time. It's just a matter of choosing which options are going to be standard. And as I said before, it'll be 4-cable method, input-output buffers, stereo, mono, wet, dry, wet, and there'll also be an audition loop. But I forgot we got to do our giveaway. So this is our next giveaway is going to be for another set of 2 guitar pick packs. 2 packs. Not the wrapper, but 2 packs of guitar picks. So first person to answer this question, sorry, we're not doing a milliamperator, we're doing guitar picks. And first person to answer this correctly will win a 2-pack. I think it's about 20-ish picks per pack, a potpourri of different assorted picks. First person to answer correctly in the chat wins. Here's the question. What is the most isolated way to power your pedals if you're not going to use a standalone power supply? So again, you're not going to use like a Voodoo Lab or a True Tone or any of that stuff. What is the most isolated way, the quietest, most isolated way to power your pedals if you're not going to be using a standalone power supply? And I'll give you a hint. You can't power all pedals with this particular thing. And it looks like Vince got it. The answer would be a battery is the most isolated way. Now, obviously, not everything can be powered with a battery, but it is the quietest. It is the original isolated power supply, if you will. So congrats to Vince. But if you didn't win, no problem, because we have another giveaway in 8 minutes. So I'm going to start the clock again. And in 8 minutes, we will do another giveaway. And let's get back to some questions. All right. Yeah, Mejia threw up there that we're going to do the Dario 2-pack signature picks. Yeah, and fun fact, the apartment building that Tupac lived in for, I guess, a good part of his life in Oakland is like really close down the street here from where from where our house is. All right, let's see. Next one. Is there a difference of tone, sound, or sharpness between branded patch cables and generic ones? I don't think any more than there could be between any 2 brands of guitar cables. I think it really depends on what it is that they've chosen to use as the materials. And sometimes you can get budget ones that actually sound pretty decent, and sometimes they might sound pretty bad. I would just say use your ears, test them, see what you think sounds better. Usually, I find that just the higher quality ones typically are lower capacitance, and they typically have better shielding. They're a little quieter. But every once in a while you might get lucky. So I would try it. I would try it and see. Raymond, my Quad Cortex board is coming along well, but I was thinking I wanted to make a very basic pass-through junction box. Could I use the schematic of the 4-cable junction box you made and simplify it? Yeah, and there's also one that is totally passive. That is, and maybe that's the one you mean. That's the 4-cable method one. And you could even do like D-shape punches if you wanted to make it so that it had the XLR throughs for the Quad Cortex. You just have to drill it out. I think that a D punch is, I think it's a 1-inch or pretty close to a 1-inch. So you may not be able to use the 1590B box for that unless you turn the D style connector sideways, because I think vertically it won't have enough clearance, and you kind of have to cheat it up to the top of the enclosure, because the kind of the lip or the return flange on the bottom of the enclosure from a Hammond will like interfere with it. So either if you drill it wrong, you'll have to like grind down the kind of the one of the inner lips of the bottom of the Hammond box, or you could just go with something slightly taller than a 1590B. And I forget what the designation one is, the one that's like slightly taller but roughly the same size, like kind of like a JHS style enclosure. That'll have plenty of room. How hard is it to make TRS cables? It's pretty much the same as making a regular guitar cable. You just have one more lead. So really, really pretty easy. And as long as you just match both sides, it doesn't really matter which one of the center conductors you designate to tip or ring, as long as the sleeve is the sleeve on both sides, so the shield is in the same place. It doesn't really matter which one you designate as which, as long as they, again, it's just 1-to-1 on both sides. So pretty easy. I need an expression pedal for an HX Stomp. Which one should I buy? I mean, the Mission ones are fine. I think that Dunlop is good, and I think that the Dunlop ones, you can reverse the polarity, so it'll work with a Line 6 device. They're a little smaller, a little lighter weight, because the Mission ones are basically a wah enclosure, as I recall. So I think it just depends on the footprint that you're interested in. Fractal also has a nice one that I really like. Let's see. So I have a question. I was watching the DIY buffer video, I'm presuming he means, and I was wondering if there's anything to put a switch to flip the phase, as long as the buffer is in stereo. So you really need a transformer to do that, and really what you're inverting is the polarity and not the phase, because really the problem you're combating against is one speaker is going out while the other one's going in, and so you're actually fixing the polarity. So no, I didn't put a transformer option in there, and the main reason why I didn't is that I hadn't found a transformer for that application for DIY that I thought was going to be acceptable and was going to work. So you have two options. If you want to just change the polarity, the easiest way to do that, that's least invasive, is to make a speaker cable that has an inverted speaker cable. So basically that means take a normal speaker cable and just invert one side where you reverse the leads, and that will solve the problem of the polarity, which you're calling phase here, but it's really polarity. That'll solve that problem. What it won't solve is if you have some sort of grounding issue. It won't isolate anything. So if that's the problem, then you will need to get some sort of isolation box, like a Lely P-Split or Radial makes some versions of these, which are just passive boxes that have isolation transformers, and this will resolve the issue that you have. And also they typically have a polarity switch so that you can invert the polarity there as well, so you can get the two amps matching up. Eventually, we will add a diagram to show how to wire in a transformer to one of the outputs and wire in a polarity switch. But for now, I don't have that option. I do have a transformer now that I think will work for this, but I haven't tested it thoroughly enough where I can put it onto a diagram. But eventually, we will add that. But in the meantime, you can follow the guide that I've just given you with the inverted speaker cable to solve the polarity issue. If you need to have isolation, then you're going to have to change a little bit around using some sort of isolation transformer box as a separate piece. And typically most of them are input transformers, so you want to have them as close to the amp as possible, not on the pedal board. And most guys that are making isolation transformers in inside enclosures with buffers, they're typically using, like, Jensen, which is a great quality transformer, but they're really input transformers, and so they really shouldn't be at the pedal board side. They should really be as close to the amp as possible with the shortest lead from the output into the input of the amplifier. Let's see. Any suggestions on powering an HX Stomp and HX Effects on the same board? Wow. I forget what the current limitations are of it. I think most of the big power supplies have maybe 2 amps, so you might be cutting it close. I would say you probably are going to need to get a second power supply with its own AC mains, not one that can be, daisy chained off of itself. So like, 2 Zumas or 2 Chalks DC7s. Those would be, I think you're going to need 2 supplies, or you could use 1 supply and you could have one of them, probably the HX Effects, powered with its native supply, and then you could tie them up on a single. You could make a box that has them both come into the same. You could have a box that makes them both come into the same power source, so you could just have one cable going to the wall. But if you're not sure about how to do that, then you might want to have like a power strip on the side. If you check out Rhett Shull's board, I think we got some sort of kind of like trip light clone that had an IEC out of the back, And that actually was a fine power supply. You can mount it to the pedal board very easily. It's got some kind of like dog ear tabs on it, so you can drill it through the board. And it seemed fine, stable, and you could run, one of your HX power supplies into that, and then have the other one have a current doubler cable. And I have some diagrams on how to make that on our YouTube channel, so you can check that out. That'll power the HX Stomp or the HX Effects, whichever one you decide you don't want on the provided power supply. But it is time for another giveaway. So for this giveaway, we're going to be giving away a True Tone 1-spot power supply, and this will be great for anybody that needs to power maybe just like a pedal here and there, that they just want to kind of audition something, they need a power supply for it. This will be a fine power supply for that purpose. So again, the way this is going to work, I'm going to put on the screen question. The first person to answer that question correctly in the chat will win this item. So the question is, name 2 types of power supplies and give an example of each type. So these are kind of like the 2 types of power supplies, like the style of power supply that they are. We talk about these 2 different styles a lot. One utilizes a transformer, the other one does not. It's doing a completely different technology. And these transformers are generally on one type, or typically more like R core or C core. Some of them say that they're toroid. Most of them are not. They're sort of semi-toroid. But let me know what those 2 types of power supplies are and give me an example of each one. And it looks like Elijah Smith already nailed this one. Let's see. I'm trying to find you here, Elijah Smith. So he has switch mode and linear. An example, it would be pedal power 2 plus. And for the switching was Azuma. So these are correct answers. There's a lot of correct answers for this, but he was the first guy that got a correct answer. So congratulations to Elijah on that one. Good work. Let's keep going with some more questions. And I'll probably try to go here I'll answer as many as I can. I'll probably go for another 10 or 15. And then for people that are on our private chat, they can come and join us on that. And if you're interested, or you're like, what the heck's a private chat? We have a private chat for all of our Patreon members, and we have a private chat that is for all of our supporting members through the rigdr.com. And we have memberships as low as $5 a month and can range upwards from there depending on what you want. And even just like the basic tiers, you get to be part of the private chat we do pretty much weekly. You get deals and discounts on all Vertex products, and even some Rig Doctor products as well. And you get some cool early access to new stuff that maybe you get access to before it's out to the public. A few things like that. But we also offer a free version as well. So if you're like, man, $5 right now is a hardship, you can always request a free account. And nobody in the membership team knows the difference between a paid membership and a free membership. They all look the same. So don't be bashful. If you're like, you know what, I really want to be a part of this, but $5 a month is not in the cards right now. Just send us an email, info@vertexeffects.com or info@therigdr.com, and request a free account. We give 100% of those for free that are requested, and all we ask is that if things change and you can afford the minimum, then you can become a supporting member at that time. But as long as you need a free account, we will grant you a free account. We don't want money to stand between you and Great Tone. So please do that if you would like to be a part of the private chat that follows this. Let's see. I'm trying to find back where I was. All right, I think I found it. Moises asks, what kind of Velcro tape do we commonly use? Well, we do use Duloc still quite a bit, but we started doing our own with our friends over at Godlike with the Power Grip, and so we sell a version of Power Grip on our site. And the main reason why we converted to Power Grip is that it's just one part. Ordinarily, to get the right stick with Duloc, you have to use 2 different densities, the SJ3550 and the 3551. Whereas with the Power Grip, you just use one, and it's it's actually stronger than the way that it would work if I offset 2 different Dulocs. The other thing about the Power Grip that I like is that it comes off clean. So when you pull it up, you don't have this glue residue everywhere, and it can take a while to get that off of a pedal board. The other thing I like about it is that it's very impervious to heat and humidity, so it doesn't pull up. And I mean, I can like throw a heat gun on it for a while, and it'll melt the Velcro before it actually ever releases. And with dual lock, it pretty much picks itself up right away. So I prefer the adhesive. I think it's a better quality adhesive, and 3M obviously is a powerhouse, and they have, I'm sure, brilliant scientific minds there. But when it comes to Velcro, I think that the Power Grip is better. So I've been using that on the last probably 6 or 8 builds, kind of after we got that agreement with our friends over at Godlike. And you can buy it right on the rigdr.com, but I think you can also just buy it from Amazon and places like that. So check it out. I think it's better, but dual lock is still great. If somebody said, I want this pedal board with dual lock, I wouldn't object to that. Let's see. Question regarding the boost. If the volume is plugged into the loop, will it still function when the boost is off, or do you have to turn on? No, so the volume is always active. So when the boost is off, it just goes up to unity gain. When the boost is on, it goes up to however much boost you've set. So it's always on. Have you noticed the TS Mini is noisy or pops when engaged? Is mine damaged? I use a True Tone CS7. I would try using it by itself first, David, and make sure that it's maybe not reacting to something else going on in the signal path. And sometimes mechanical foot switches can have a lot of noise, but I always felt that people inflated this a little bit. Like a lot of guys that and this is not just with my pedals, or I've just found this generally, is a lot of people that complain about the pops, they're not playing live a lot, because usually those things are so unintelligible in a live setting. I remember some of the old switching systems when I first started getting into doing this stuff. The reason these FET foot switches and stuff like that for switchers, rack switchers and stuff like that, and those all popped, But it was like when you were playing it with a band, like I was playing in like wedding bands, you could never hear it. I mean, if I was in my room and I was like, if I was in this environment and I played, I'd be like, oh yeah, that kind of like is annoying. But when I was playing it live, I was like, it's not like it's really unintelligible and it's not noticeable. I mean, unless you were, I don't know, playing like Canon in D or something like that, and you had to like step on a pedal, in a wedding, and it was like this really, sort of like important moment, and you didn't want to have this big, pop from a butt contact switch be reverberated through an amp, then maybe that'd be problematic. But for most of us, I think that sometimes this is sort of like over exaggerated how problematic it is. And sometimes it's a design issue. Sometimes it's the foot switch quality is kind of bad. I think Alpha is the best foot switch if you're going to go for a 3-pull double throw that has the least amount of mechanical noise. And then sometimes it is just mechanical noise, and then other times it's the actual pedal itself. And really, when you go to a relay switch, it's not that they solve the problem in most cases. A lot of them just dissipate the input signal temporarily before it brings in the audio on the input side. So you're not really solving the problem. You're kind of just like getting the discharge happening inaudibly, and there's like a time delay before the audio signal comes in. So actually, when you hit the foot switch, there's a little gap between when the audio actually comes in. And that's not, again, across the board, but there a lot of the relay switch stuff, like a lot of people are like, well, my pedal doesn't pop anymore now that I bought the relay switched version. And it's not that they solve the problem. They just, discharge the initial signal and have some sort of delay before the actual signal comes into the signal path. So it's not exactly a fix. It's just kind of a disguise. All right, let's see. All right, Moises asks, in the board, what's the pedal that's always on? I think he probably means my pedal board. This guy? I think that's what you mean. We'll show it again for people that are new. And then underneath, under the hood, so there's no, I wouldn't say there's any particular pedal that's always on because it's all in the switcher. So, and the collider, which is the MIDI controlled delay reverb, that can be controlled through MIDI, so I don't have to do any turning it on and off. I can have it all controlled through the RJM through MIDI and have that turn on off and change things. So everything's in the switcher. So I don't have anything that's necessarily always on. I think it just depends on what combination I want to use and what I want to turn off. So I have a pedal board and a Digitech GNX3. How can I best use both, an ABY switcher or just one into the other? What about buffers? I don't think I know what a GNX3 is. I'm looking this up. Digitech. Okay, got it. It's like a multi-effects thing. Okay. So you have a pedal board. Okay. Well, I think that the question is whether you want to use them both at the same time, because if you have an ABY switch, you're either going to get one or the other, and then I guess it would be you'd have to get actually like a dual loop. It's not really an ABY. You'd have to have like two loops, and then you could have them both on together. But I think it depends on whether the order of the effects that you use in one would be the best placement of the effects on the other. So that's kind of like the tricky thing. So if you're using the GNX for delay, reverb, and overdrive, that makes it tough. If your pedal board also has delay, reverb, and overdrive, and you're planning to use them both at the same time, it can be a lot of finagling. So I think it depends on order. I think it depends on what effects are being utilized in each part. And if you're going to do it and you want to be able to isolate one from the other, then you're going to need basically a true bypass looper that has 2 foot switches and 2 loops. And I think a cheap one that I've seen around that somebody had brought here recently was made by One Control. And it was very simple, 2 mechanical switches, an input and output, and then loop 1 send and return and loop 2 send and return. And it had a foot switch for each. And that would be something that you could use for this if you wanted to isolate. And you could also bypass both if you just want a straight guitar sound. So I think that maybe would be where I would start. Nicholas says, is it okay to use a lot of Boss pedals without an output buffer? Well, if you got a lot of Boss pedals, you've got a lot of buffers on there, not great ones. I would still use an output buffer because the typical Boss output impedance is 1K, whereas 100 ohms is kind of more of the ideal line driving output impedance. And if you have a high quality output buffer, you're probably not going to have much more noise added to what would already be created from all the Boss pedals, so it would be pretty negligible at that point. So I would still say use an output buffer, but I think it's up to you. Is there any significant difference from a dyno stereo tri-chorus like the Red 7 or Keeley to a stereo one like Free the Tone? Well, they're pretty different from each other in that I think the only one that's actually analog is the Red 7. The Keeley one I don't think resembles a tri-stereo chorus at all, even though it looks like it and says that that's the style. I mean, I would say it's a chorus, but it doesn't sound like a tri-stereo chorus to me. The Free the Tone one is also digital, but I think sounds very close. I also think that the New Neighbor one sounds very close. And I did a podcast with Michael Nielsen on the Rig Doctor podcast. If you're not subscribed to that, go to the Rig Doctor podcast on your favorite podcatcher. But he would recommended that one, and I hadn't tried it, even though I'm buds with Brian. And I tried, and I thought, wow, this is actually really good. And the cool thing about that is that it has the D-tune on it as well. And that's kind of like the secret that everybody forgets about, is that everybody that used a tri-stereo chorus also always used, always, in parallel after the stereo split out of the tri-stereo chorus, they almost always used an H3000 set to +9, -9, or an SPX 90 set to +9, -9 as that micro pitch kind of harmonizer. And because the New Neighbor has that, it sort of eliminates this extra element that you might need to really fully go into that really sort of like that really big stereo kind of like keyboard pad-ish chorus sound that everybody that used a tri-stereo chorus had. So I think that Brian's actually, in some ways, is the closest because it has that element, and the other ones don't have that. But it is digital. If you want to go full analog, the Red 7 is the only option. And the thing too about the stereo, if you're going full like rack 80s sound, is that it's nice to have the stereo because that was the stereo split, but most people are not doing that. And I don't find it to be a huge drawback with the Red 7 because I'm actually running, that's the last effect that runs mono into the front of the amp. And then line out comes into my collider, which is then where it goes to stereo. And so only the delay and reverb are wet, or in the 100% wet, left and right. Everything else is dry into the front of the amp. So I think the Red 7 is actually fine for that. But if I were going to do like a true 80s, like full 80s signal path, I'd probably get the new Neighbor one. Because it's small, and I think it does the full thing in one box. I want to ask you a certain thing. I want a real classic pedal board, except pedal train that I already have. Do you have any suggestions like a real flight board? Well, I recommend my pedal boards. That's what I recommend. And if you don't want the riser, you can just buy the platform, or you can go to guys like Get Off My Case that make the really standard old school flat boards that are laminated plywood with like a Formica or some sort of countertop material and then ABS on the bottom. So I'd say one of those would be the way to go. Have you ever tried a MIDI switch like a Morning Star? Yeah, you can watch one of our videos where I use one as a looper for a Line 6 HX effects, and I'm doing all of the pedal switching through one of those. And can it run two pedals such as a Specular Tempest and a Boss DD500? And I think are you talking about the foot switch? I can't remember whether the MC6 is the foot switch or if it's the looper thing. But yeah, if they're both connected through MIDI, then you could run all of your MIDI stuff through it. What is the process of deciding what pedals you don't need on your board? I want my board to do so many things, but I don't have the space. I say I use the 90-10 rule. Whatever I use 90% of the time is what needs to be on the board. For the 10% fringe stuff, I think you either have audition loops or something like that you can bring those in if you want them, because invariably most people that end up making these huge pedal boards, they always end up coming back and saying it was their eyes were bigger than their stomachs and that they were not as judicious as they should have been. So I mean, it's really important to be a good editor of the things that you actually use 90% of the time. And so I always tell people, sorry, my phone's about to die, so I'm just going to plug her in. So I would say really build the board around what's 90% of the usage, and I wouldn't make much consideration for the other stuff, and really being kind of a really dispassionate about the stuff that is sort of like a fringe thing, because you can get out of hand really fast, and it makes the boards cumbersome, and usually people don't like gigging with these really monstrous boards. It can become a real albatross after a while. Is it okay to leave your pedal board powered 24/7 at home, or should you unplug it each time? I mean, I don't think it's going to hurt it if you forget to turn it off, for a day or two. But sometimes you can the power supply and stuff like that can get a little bit warm, and it's not that they're made to do that, but sometimes if they're on for 24 hours a day for a month, I don't think that would be like it should be able to run it. But I would just say my instinct is to turn it off when it doesn't need to be ready to go. Although I don't always observe that. I've had this pedal board plugged in for a long time. I leave my rack on most of the time because I don't like to have to like go in and start everything up again, and I like to just the only thing I like to wait for is the standby switch on my tube amps, and that's about it. So I would say it should be able to handle it, but I would recommend when you're not using it, turning it off. Sometimes if the power supply stays warm for a while, if you have anything on top of it like Velcro, it'll sometimes release the Velcro and stuff like that. But I think it's a good practice to just turn it off in between, just in case. You never know. Let's make sure I'm referring to the same person here. Yeah, I'm saying get a Vertex pedal. Check out the Vertex pedal boards. They're on our website. You can check them out. And if those are not what you're looking for, because we have obviously flat versions, we have versions with tiers. And if you don't like that style, then you can go over to Get Off My Case, and they'll make you whatever size pedal board you want. You can make it down to the nearest quarter of an inch, and they'll make it exactly the way that you want it, and they're great. Is there a concern with placing a switcher far? Sorry, let me get this one on there. Is there a concern with placing a switcher somewhat far from? Oh, here it is. From where most pedals will be wired or located. Wondering if that affects the signal quality. Well, you have longer cables between the connection and the source. If you really want to have the switcher far away from the pedals, I would just say rack them and then just have a foot controller. And so you can have the foot controller as far away as you want, from the pedals, and it shouldn't matter. So that's what I would say if you really want to be far away from them. Any thoughts on the 29 pedals Una? We put one on David Ryan Harris's board. I think it's. I don't have any objection to it. It's unloaded on the input. I think it's like a 2 meg or maybe a little higher than that. I forget exactly what the measurement was. But it's only one. It would only be, if you like it, it would just be an input buffer. You would still need an output buffer. And the thing that people like about it is they like the EQ controls that he has on there. It's well built, unquestionably. But I would just say the choices for me for a pedal board context just don't match up. But that doesn't mean that you won't like it. To me, the challenge with a lot of guys that are making products like that are not building rigs is there's this disconnect because they don't have the volume of player experiences and putting together something with 20 units and then seeing what it actually sounds like at the end. And this is an issue with pedal builders too, just generally is we tend to design in a vacuum, and we don't consider that there's going to be 10 pedals before our pedals ever introduced, and could be 10 pedals after when our pedals introduced, and those can have an influence on the device. And when we're designing it, we're just like, oh, this sounds great. I'm plugging it right into my amp, and I think it's one of the best pedals I've ever made. But you're not thinking about what's going to happen if it's driven by 20K or if it's driven by 100 ohms. And after the pedal, if the input impedance of the stuff that's following it is 10 megs or 200K. So there's all these variables that I think a lot of us builders don't always consider when we're thinking about pedals. And I feel very fortunate that the first 10 years almost I was doing this stuff, I was not really doing many pedals. I was really doing more rigs. And you can see pretty quickly what works and what doesn't work, and if there's stuff that's sensitive or doesn't play well with other stuff. And sometimes this has to do with buffering. Sometimes it has to do with the impedance. Sometimes this has to do with the sensitivity of different devices or different parts you've decided to use in a device. And so to get back to the question of the unit, I think it's very well built. It's as well built as anything that you're going to find. I think the challenge is that, in my opinion, a buffer is not an EQ or a distortion generator. So if you're doing things to shift the way that it sounds or the gain structure, it's inherently anti-buffer at that point, because a buffer should have no color, nothing that it's doing. And so I think that guys like this idea that they can compensate for EQs and stuff like that. But if your sound is what you want, and the guitar sounds as it should plugged into the amp, then it shouldn't need to be altered at the point that you get into the pedal board if that's the first thing in there. The one cool thing that pedal does that I think it was thoughtful and resourceful is that it had that loop for you to have something that's pre-buffer. Now, you could do that with using any of the DIY buffers. You would just basically put a passive input, and then you would put a loop, like a send and return loop, and you'd put the buffer on the return so that when you loop in a fuzz, the buffer would happen after it. So you could do that, and then he's got a foot switch for it, so you can bring it in and out, which you could, I guess, add. But I don't see the value in bringing it in and out. I think if you have a fuzz wired into a loop, you would presumably just turn on the fuzz. That would be the foot switch to turn it on and off. You wouldn't need to do it on the buffer necessarily. But I think it's a high quality device. I think it sounds good. I just don't think it's totally neutral. So that would be my feedback about it. I think it's excellent built. I think that it's very creative. And I think the look is cool. I think the enclosure is cool. I would just say you would only buy it if you really wanted to make adjustments and you didn't like the neutral sound of just the guitar into the amp. And if you get one, you would have to get two because you need one first and you need one last. Or you could get another output buffer because I think the output impedance of it was pretty low. I think it was like close to zero. I think it was like 50 ohms or something like that. So good on the output impedance. I just think that the input impedance and the tone controls are for somebody that wants to change their tone. And my approach with the buffering is like it shouldn't do anything. It should just replicate what's coming in. I'll take a couple more and then we'll finish up. Any experience with the Fender engine room? It looks like a Zuma killer. Am I missing something? Yeah, I don't know. I tried reaching out to Fender about getting one, and so it's they haven't gotten back to me. But I might just go and buy one when I'm at Sweetwater. I'll be at Sweetwater next month, so maybe I'll buy one there and we'll take a look at it and see what it really does. But it looks great on paper. I think it looks like it should be good. Who's your guitar god? I don't know. It changes all the time. Right now I've been listening to a lot of like Jackson Browne and Danny Korchmar has been a guy that I've been digging a lot of his parts. So right now I'd say it's Danny Korchmar, but it changes from month to month. But yeah, I've been listening to like kind of that era of Jackson Browne where Danny was playing, Strats and Voxes and they just and Marshalls and sound really good, just like really jangly, really kind of just like edge of breakup Strat tones, which I think are really great. The other one I've been digging lately tone wise, and I forget the name of the woman that played it, but the first solo Natalie Merchant record, and like Carnival has got a great guitar tone. I thought it was a Strat, but it turned out it's like a PRS, like CE22 or something like that. It's like some early, PRS that would have existed at that time, with like a coil splitter. That tone's pretty killer. So that's what I've been into lately. I think I answered this earlier, but for insert cables, I still use 25 or 20, 21 or 20. What is it? 24, 2314. 2314. That's it. I have all these numbers, Mogami numbers. I don't understand, but yeah, 2314 is what I would use, and then you would just have two of them on the stereo side, and then just one regular guitar cable's on the opposite. Let's take a couple more. Amphenol, I don't think makes cables. They make plugs. So they're like a competitor of like a Switchcraft or a Neutrik. The plugs are good. Australian made. Good. No problems. No problems with them. I like them. What's your dream pedal that you don't already own? Dream pedal. I don't know that I have any dream pedal that I don't already own. Maybe I don't have. I guess this isn't really like it's not a pedal, but I want an original ADA stereo tap delay. Is what I want. The Holdsworth. It's really like a chorus sound. It's not really a delay. That's what I want. I want a stereo tap delay. But I'll answer a few more. Oh man, you made a Boss Valley. I don't have any more of them, so I would give you one, but I haven't made them in years. I don't think I've had any for years, so I'm sorry. I can't give you one. And we'll do one last question. What advice would you give to somebody who is starting trying to make custom pedal boards? What advice would I give? I'm trying to be thoughtful. I think that there's a couple of things. I think one would be it can sometimes be a slow process. Like even if you know everything, even if you're an electronics wizard, let's say, which I'm not, that a lot of this stuff is learning what the deficits are in some of the devices themselves and certain combinations and certain pieces of gear. And the more times that you do it, you will have that it'll inform more about the next rig. And so it's so hard to teach experience. And I'm sure that guys like a Robert Bradshaw or a Dave Friedman or a Pete Cornish, there's things that they know that somebody my age doesn't know, even if we maybe have the same rough, let's just say, technical baseline is within a standard deviation or two. That there's things that even a highly trained electronics engineer trying to do the same thing that a Bob Bradshaw does, or the same thing that Dave Friedman does, who's a brilliant engineer that knows a lot about audio electronics, or that is designing audio electronics for another company. They're just not going to be able to know all those gotchas. And some of them, when you're in the high impedance world of guitar pedals, there are things that sometimes they're not always so easy to be able to identify or know, and they've done so many things with so many pieces of gear. They just know when they're seeing a symptom of something. They know when they're seeing a certain behavior, a certain device, and then they have now this lookup table that they've developed in their brains of all the different offshoots that this could be. And the more times that you've done this stuff and you've troubleshot and you've problem solved, you have this really well-developed sort of Rolodex of things that you can rely upon as you're trying to solve a problem. And really, engineering is a great thing to understand and to know, and electronics is an important thing to understand and know when you're doing this stuff. But as important as any of that is really having problem-solving skills where you really understand how to not just mask a problem, but how to get to the root of it. And even sometimes I don't always get there. Like sometimes I know how to, I have a sense of what it is. And even sometimes I get stuck, or I'll have to phone a friend and say, hey, I'm having this problem, and what do you think this might be? So I think that's part of it, and I think also having the humility to tell a customer or a client that one, you can't do it, or that you don't have the experience to know how to do that, or to ask somebody for help if you don't know. And I think that was something that when I was first starting out, I was too arrogant to admit some of that. And so I would say that learn from my mistakes in that regard, and be okay with not knowing it all, and asking for help, or admitting if you can't do something that you have a limitation, because sometimes we want to look so good, for our customers or for an artist that you're trying to impress. And I can say this from experience, and sometimes, you don't know, and it's okay to say that. So that would be my advice. So with that, I will discontinue the stream for today. And if you didn't get your question answered, please take this time to copy it. And when the stream ends, you can paste it in the comments, and I will get to it over the course of the weekend. And I'm sorry to the one person that didn't like the stream. If you were that guy, tell us what we could do better, and we'll try to resolve that for the next stream. And thanks everybody for being here. Again, if you want to join us on the private stream, you can always send us an email, and it's just info@vertexeffects.com or info@therigdr.com, and we can explain to you the different options. You can also go to our website, to therigdr.com, and you can see our different membership options. You can go to Patreon and search Rig Doctor, and you'll see the different Patreon options. And if you want a free account, we offer those as well. If none of those options work for you financially, we're happy to have you on board. Again, nobody knows who has a free account, who has a regular account. Everybody is anonymized, and we don't want money to be the reason that you can't continue the conversation with us. So please feel free to do that if you haven't already, and we can see you over on the private stream. We would be happy to have you. And Mejia is going to email out the link right now for the private stream. So for those of you who are on Patreon or a part of our membership services, you'll get that email in just a moment. Thanks, everybody, for joining me, and we'll see you hopefully next week. Bye-bye.